The Rishonim tell us that the first three brachos of Shmona Esrei correspond to the three avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The first bracha, again Avraham, corresponds to Avraham. The second bracha, the bracha of Mechayim Mesim, corresponds to Yitzchak. The Medrash even tells us that after at Akedas Yitzchak, when Avram brought Yitzchak onto the altar, momentarily he lost his life. He came back to life, so he experienced the resurrection of the dead. And immediately Yitzchak said, Baruch atah Hashem mechayim mesim. And the Rishonim tell us that the same is by the third bracha, the bracha of Atah Kadosh, where we end off Baruch atah Hashem Hakel HaKadosh. That corresponds to Yaakov. And the Shibbolei Leket writes that Yaakov Avinu was actually the one who originally recited that bracha. When was that? This week's Parsha. When Yaakov had his dream, he went to sleep, and he experienced that this place that he rested in was a very, very special place. And he says, Manora hamakom hazeh, how awesome is this place? So immediately upon awakening, he made the bracha, Baruch atah Hashem Hakel HaKadosh, because he experienced the intense holiness of the place and everything that's going on. What did he experience? What was the Kedusha that he had? So that requires a lot of iyun, a lot of discussion. But I want to speak on one point that gets overlooked. And that is, it says, the pasuk says that he rested on a rock. Rested on a rock. And Chazal tells us, the Gemara tells us, that really, as the pasuk says, Avnei HaMakom, it was plural, many rocks. And each rock said, I want Yaakov, the holy Yaakov, to rest himself on myself. And Hashem made a miracle, and all the rocks came together to one rock, and Yaakov ended up resting on that one rock, which was really all of the rocks. So what's this idea that all the rocks wanted Yaakov to go ahead and rest himself on it? So the Ramchal has a Sefer Mesilas Yesharim, as we know, which talks about the person's growth through many, many different stages of self-development. So in the final chapter, chapter 26, Perek Chavav, is about the Kadosh, the Holy One. And many people, they learn Mesilas Yesharim, they don't get that far. Because it's not, we're not going to get there anyway, so might as well jump to another book once you get into the middle. I believe it's important to finish the whole thing and to see what could happen. What could people get to? We should strive for that also. Why not? We might not make it there. We should learn about the whole ladder to try to get to the top. Why jump off in the middle? So in chapter 26, the Ramchal is discussing the Kadosh. And he says that a person who totally brings himself to connection to Hashem, he's davuk. He's literally attached to Hashem. So he says that any physical, mundane act that he engages in, the whole act becomes elevated. So for example, he says, let's say you have this person who's a kadosh, holy person. He goes ahead and he eats. So when he eats, it's as if you took food and put the food on the mizbeach, on the altar in the Beis HaMikdash, and offered it up. Just like obviously when you bring a korban, you bring a sacrifice, the food that you bring in the Beis HaMikdash on the altar is holy. So too, when this person drinks Tropicana, so the orange juice becomes holy. It's elevated. The food, the drink, everything becomes elevated through him because he himself is connected to God. So it's as if it went and connected to God also. So any food that he eats, any drink that he drinks, becomes elevated as well. Then he continues, and he says the same is by inanimate objects. That any object that this kadosh, this holy person uses, brings an elevation, a spiritual elevation to that item. And he says, I'll bring you a proof. My proof is this statement of Chazal, that all the rocks were crying out, I want Yaakov to rest his head on me. What did they want that? Because since Yaakov was kadosh, So therefore, they wanted to connect to it. They wanted to have that spiritual elevation that even mundane, inanimate objects can experience. And therefore, the Ramchal writes that this is something that the Kadosh is doing. It's not just that he connected to the highest of the high, that he elevated himself to a very, very high place close to Hashem, but he brings the whole world with him every time he goes ahead and uses things in the world. Okay, so many of you are thinking, like, why am I telling you this? Why is that relevant to us? Why is it important? It's interesting. Reb Chaim Kanievsky has a sefer called Orchos Yosher, very, very special sefer that everyone should learn. And in Perek Zayin, under Hashkacha, he brings different stories that almost show this idea that we're talking about in the generation that just was, not so long ago. He brings a fascinating story about Reb Kiva Eger. We'll leave that out for now. That's not so important for us. But he brings a story of Reb Eliezer Moshe Hurwitz, the Reb Eliezer Moshe Mipinsk, who he says that in the town of Pinsk, all the non-Jewish farmers used to go ahead and beg him, just walk on their farms. Because they push him, that he should trample, he should walk on their fields. Everyone knew, even the non-Jews, the ground that he would walk on, would get blessed. And talks about there were these dogs that would trample on the people, and any time Moshe Hurwitz would come, all the dogs would run away. He goes through these things, and he says that in our door we don't see this so much. In our generation we seem to have lost that. In parentheses he says maybe to bring the bigger nisayon, the bigger test and trial in our generation, which is at the heels of Mashiach. We need to be tested more, so if we would see tzaddik and very righteous people that just walk around and these things would happen to, maybe we'd lose our nisayon to believe in Hashem. But he says it's still there, and you got to look for it. But there are people that are elevated in kadosh and super high levels, that just very, very simple things, everything, the world gets elevated with it. Okay, so it's just important for us to realize that it exists. We should all strive for it. Great. But here comes the chiddush, and that is that even though this is all written in the final chapter of the Mesilas Yesharim, the chapter that many of us don't even get to, or we think is irrelevant to us, the Ramchal says the exact same thing in chapter 1. In the intro to his Mesilas Yesharim, he says the exact same thing. It's a proof that he brings in chapter 1 and in chapter 26. The bookends of the Mesilas Yesharim is Yaakov Avinu's experience with the rocks. And he says as follows. He says the entire world was created to be used by man, so that man could go and attach himself to his creator. That's our goal. Everything that we do, every day we wake up, we want to try to get closer and closer and closer. That is the goal, and there is no other goal. Any business that we go into, any relationship that we go into, any mitzvah that we do, every single thing is in order to get closer to Hashem, to connect ourselves to Hashem. And the world, all of the physical items in this world are there in order to facilitate and help us get there. And he writes that if man controls himself and claves to his creator and uses the world only as an aid in the service of Hashem, so obviously he becomes elevated because he's growing through his actions, but the world itself becomes elevated with him since they're being used for its purpose. Why was this shtender put here? This shtender was put here so we could somehow get close to Hashem by using the shtender. And therefore, if we get closer to Hashem through using the shtender has now reached its purpose in being in this world. And that goes on for every single physical, mundane, inanimate object that we have. And he says, what's one of the proofs? He brings two proofs. He says, what's one proof to this? He says, regarding the stones that Yaakov took and set under his head, which all gathered in one place and said, I want the righteous to lay his head on me. And Hashem miraculously fused them into one stone. So why did the rocks want that? Because they wanted to be used to facilitate the service of Hashem. Meaning there are two different layers to these rocks. On the most simple, basic level, which is easy for us to relate to, everything wants to serve Hashem. That's why it's in this world. So if you use the chair to serve Hashem, So the chair now fulfilled its purpose in the world and gets elevated. If we use the chair, God forbid, not for the service of Hashem, so then what was the point of this chair? Poor chair. On a higher level, if someone brings himself to actually attach to Hashem, he makes it. He gets all the way to the top of the ladder. He has now went through the whole self-development process and he's perfected himself and he's kadosh, he's totally holy. Now anything he interacts with gets elevated automatically. Not just because it's used for its purpose. It's as if it connected itself to Hashem. So even if people might believe that they cannot get to that level, it's too high. Okay, we should know that it exists. We should know that there are people out there that have it. We should know that we'd like to strive to get there. Okay? But even on the most basic level, as the intro, when you don't even get to level 1 on the ladder of self-development, the Ramchal talks about the point that our goal is to try to connect to Hashem and to try to use everything in our lives to connect to Hashem. There's nothing that we have that we can't use for the good. Question is, do we use it for the good? And obviously this is a lifelong work. When we sit down and we eat, why are we eating? Is it purposeful or is it just to stuff ourselves? When we go out and play ball, why are we playing ball? Just because I have to play ball? Who said? Or I want to play ball because it's going to help me think better, have a clearer mind, be happier around other people, to be able to learn more, and to be nicer and do chesed with other people. When I get dressed in the morning, why am I getting dressed? Why am I wearing this specific clothing? Why am I going shopping? Why am I going here for Shabbos? Why am I talking to this friend? Every single interaction that we have with everything in the world could be with a purpose. Could go ahead and have a significant aliyah, significant elevation. The Ksav Sofer asks the following question in the beginning of this week's parsha. The pasuk says, "Vayikatz mishnato." Yaakov woke up from his slumber. He went to sleep. I had this dream, and he woke up. So the Medrash says, "Al tikri mishnato." Don't read the word mishnato from his sleep. Read it mishnato from his mishnah, meaning he was learning the whole time while he was sleeping. Okay, some people understand the Medrash to say, well, Yaakov Avinu was, learning for 14 years in the yeshiva Shem Ve'ever. He didn't sleep, it says. So now, he takes his first sleep. So what do you think he's going to be sleeping? Think about what he's sleeping. Of course, he's going to be learning Mishnah. He's learning Torah in his sleep. That's one explanation, and a valid one. But the Ksav Sofer says, no, that's not the pshat. Of course he was going to sleep. He hasn't slept in 14 years. The guy's exhausted. He was not thinking about Mishnayos. He was not learning Torah while he was sleeping. So what's the deal? What does it mean that when the Medrash says that he woke up, not from his sheinato, from his sleep, but from his mishnato, from his mishnah? He went to sleep for the purpose of waking up in the morning so that he could go ahead and learn better and serve Hashem better. And if one goes to sleep at night, because he's tired, that's why he went to sleep, in order to wake up in the morning to serve Hashem better, then every second of his sleep is as if he was serving Hashem at that point. If a person goes to sleep at night so tomorrow he can learn better, then the whole sleep is as if he's learning. If he goes to sleep so that the next day he can do chesed with more koach, with more energy, it's as if he's doing chesed the whole time. We could easily just switch our mindset in what we're doing, and that could change everything that we're doing from then on. So even though it's true, again, we see that anything, any inanimate object attaches itself to someone who's kadosh, someone who's holy like Yaakov Avinu, gets elevated automatically, but we could elevate the entire world. The books, the lights, the air conditioning, everything that we could elevate every single thing in the world if we just have in mind when we use those things to use them for proper and good things for our journey and our growth process in getting close to Hashem. Now, obviously this is difficult. Obviously this is something that's a lifelong journey of climbing the ladder of success. But it's already at the beginning, in the introduction of the Mesilas Yesharim, that we should just realize that is the reason everything in the world is there for. It's for us. It's for us to use. Makes us feel good, okay? Every single thing in the world is put in here for us to use for our selfish purposes to grow so that we can get close and closer to Hashem. So my bracha to all of us is that we should recognize that, we should realize that, and we should try to think about how we could integrate that into our basic everyday lives to try to elevate everything that we interact with to get closer and closer to Hashem. Shavua Tov.